wanted to give my thoughts on film criticism. It's, something I used to admire growing up as a kid. In fact, obviously, growing up in the 80s, that was well before the internet. And in order to do research, you went to the library or you bought books. And in the case of film reviews, I would buy a couple of movie review books. One was Leonard Maltin's uh, movie review book, and then there was another one that I got. It had more of a generic title, but I really enjoyed reading those books because it would let you sometimes look up the director, you look up the actor, and then go to the page of some movie that they made. So, um, yeah, I don't know what it was, but maybe because we all like to kind of review movies, but I admired it back in the day. But the funny thing is, as you grow up, you realize film critics get it wrong. Like they will often get it. I mean, even in the '80s, when I'm reading these books, or when I go to the newspaper, or when I used to go to the newspaper and read a review, I knew I disagreed with them on films, and I knew that I could be right and they could be wrong, but I didn't care as much at the time. Now I kind of care. Who are these people? Who are film critics to tell us what we should like and what we shouldn't like? Because the one thing I've determined over the years is it's all art. Films, film is art. Filmmakers are artists. And I mean, there are some movies that are just plain bad. I mean, if we're talking Birdemic or The Room or something like that. But otherwise, gifted filmmakers are going to make some form of art, and they're either our cup of tea or they're not our cup of tea. And any film critic who claims, that they love every type of genre and that they're qualified to review every movie is just simply untrue. They know, if they're being honest, that there are some films that maybe they're not as big a fan of. And so when they review those films, their review is going to be colored a little bit by that. Um, Typically, I don't really like gangster films. I typically don't like films where the main character is unsympathetic or unlikable. Doesn't mean they can't be great films. And that's kind of my point. They're just not my cup of tea. They can clearly be great points or great films. Don't love Scarface. I don't love The Godfather. I don't love hardly any of these Scorsese gangster films because most of the characters are kind of unlikable, or at least I don't really connect with them. So they're not my cup of tea. They're clearly great films, though. They're clearly great films. And I can kind of separate myself a little bit and say, okay, well, the filmmaking is great, the pacing is perfect, so forth and so on, the acting. But you know what? It's not my cup of tea. If you like that kind of thing, you're probably going to love this particular Scorsese film. If you're like me and it's not your cup of tea, you're probably not. That is an honest review. But unfortunately, what you get are critics who will just make a blanket statement or a declarative statement: this movie is bad, don't spend your hard-earned money on it. But they don't know. I mean, they know that it was bad for them. They know that it wasn't their cup of tea. They don't really know that it's not your cup of tea. I can't stand Michael Bay movies, but I know there are people out there that love Michael Bay movies. There are people out there that cry, watching Armageddon. I roll my eyes when I watch Armageddon. So hopefully whenever I do a review or whenever I give my opinion of a film, I hope, and I don't think I'm always successful, but I hope I at least respect the other opinions about that. And some reviewers, I don't know what their deal is, but some of them have their own biases too. For example, there's one critic, or at least one person who was kind of reviewing Casualties of War, and she literally said when she was watching Michael J. Fox, she just couldn't see anything But the character from Back to the Future, Marty McFly. Oh, it was just Marty McFly. Well, that's her problem, and that's unfortunate that she didn't get a chance to really appreciate, the powerful film Casualties of War, because she couldn't see past Marty McFly. I mean, those of us who grew up in the '80s actually saw Michael J. Fox as Alex P. Keaton in Family Ties, who was a very different character than Marty McFly. He was sarcastic. He poked fun at his sisters. He was conservative, loved money. Very different character than Marty McFly. And anybody who watches Casualties of War sees this isn't really Marty McFly. There is a similarity because Brian De Palma deliberately wanted Michael J. Fox's character to be a sympathetic figure, to be somebody that you could identify with, an everyman, if you will. And he does a great job with that. And another guy also criticized Michael J. Fox for being too short in stature. He literally asked, does the Army allow somebody that short to join the military, or would they draft someone that short? And the answer is yes. He's not that short. He's short, but he's not that short. Anyway, there was another person who reviewed Othello with Lawrence Fishburne and Kenneth Branagh, and this was on Entertainment Weekly. Again, this is back when the movie came out in the mid-'90s. And I remember the review to this very day. The guy said, Kenneth Branagh is a smug smarty pants who thinks the world of his own acting. This is probably Kenneth Branagh's greatest Shakespearean performance, his performance as Iago in Othello. Brilliant. He was nominated for a Golden Globe for his performance. It's a terrific film. Highly recommend it. Lawrence Fishburne's great in it too. Everybody's great. But Kenneth Branagh steals the show, and he's fantastic in it. So what on earth kind of review was that? A smug smarty pants who thinks the world of his own acting? That critic had something else going on. Like, I don't know if Kenneth Branagh refused to give that guy an autograph, one day. and so that's what that review feels like a little bit of a bias. Something colored that review. And, movie reviewers, critics, they will often be influenced by, if they're not invited to an early screening. They get real mad if a movie decides they don't want to show an early screening to critics. So guess what? Critics become a little bit vindictive. And this all leads me to ask this question. What makes these people qualified? Why do we read their reviews? Why do we listen to them? What on earth, what is inside them that makes them think they're better than the rest of us, or more qualified than the rest of us to critique a film? The most noble reason to be a movie critic is to try to warn people, what they shouldn't spend their hard-earned money on, I guess. But again, what makes them more qualified? They're not. Folks, these movie critics are not more qualified than you are. You know what you like, you know what you don't like, and sometimes you can be surprised. If you give a movie a chance, you might love it. In the movie In America, from Jim Sheridan, I believe. Not typically the kind of movie that I'm interested in watching. For some reason, I decided to watch it, and it's one of my top 5 favorite films of all time. So sometimes a film will surprise you. But you don't need your information from these film critics. I can guarantee you that. And so many movies that were trashed years ago are now classics. A lot of Brian De Palma films, as you know from my channel, anybody who watches, I focus a lot on Brian De Palma. Well, a lot of his films that were released in the 80s, 90s, and even 2000s, a lot of his films that were released were sometimes panned by the critics or did not do well at the box office. Years later, they've been reassessed and are considered classics or cult classics. And of course, we're talking about Phantom of the Paradise, we're talking about Blowout, we're talking about Scarface, Femme Fatale, um, and even Snake Eyes. I feel like Snake Eyes is really undergoing some reassessments lately. And the question, oh, Body Double, classic example, of course, Body Double, always one of my favorite films of all time. So, what's going on here? Well, the critics got it wrong. They got it wrong back in the 80s or when these movies came out, and now we appreciate them for what they are. And so, trust your own instincts. Like I say, you know what you like. Give a movie a chance if you don't think you'll like it. And be honest with yourself. There have been movies that I really, really wanted to like Batman from 1989. I pretended like it was just a great movie because I was a huge Batman fan, and this was the first Batman film in the cinema, I think ever. Well, besides the Adam West movie based on the TV show. But I pretended for like a couple of years that it was a great movie, and I knew in my heart it was not a great movie. At least for me. For me, I knew the script was, amateurish. I knew that there was a lot of things they did with a couple of the characters that I just obviously weren't canon, but didn't even work. Like the Chris Nolan things that weren't canon in Batman Begins and Dark Knight, they still work. In fact, they're brilliantly incorporated, the license that Nolan took in that. 89, I knew I didn't like it, but I pretended like I did, and it's not a good feeling. It's a much better feeling when you're honest about it. So anyway, one last thing about critics. There's a movie critic, for example, on Twitter, and she's elsewhere too, but particularly on Twitter, she will praise a film, gush about a film, and then like a couple of days later she's promoting these films, and they're not like I'm not saying she's trying to promote a small film so that other people will see. These are big films. Like she did this with Superman, big film, already a big box office success, at least here domestically. And she's like talking about wardrobe, and she's talking about and this is not in her review. This is a couple of days later where she all of a sudden is promoting like the Rolex watch that Lex Luthor is wearing and costume designs, and she's like really talking about all these things. And it does make me wonder if some of these film critics, I don't want to say are being paid by the studios, but are benefiting somewhat from these studios. I mean, there's no other reason I can think of why this particular critic, this is not the first time she's done this, where she will gush over a movie, like maybe a little too much, especially a movie that I saw and I go, I didn't think it was that great. But then the very next day or a couple days later, she's like showing images that are not online, but somehow she has access to, and she's talking about their Rolex that Lex Luthor is wearing, and the history of this costume designer, and this cinematographer, and so forth and so on. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I do believe that film criticism is kind of a joke. What are they here for, really? I gave the noble reason why they were supposed to be here. But the honest truth is, these film critics exist because they just love to talk about films. They love to hear themselves talk, or they love to, write about movies. Nothing wrong with that. Hell, the whole reason this channel exists is because I like talking about movies. But they love to hear themselves talk, and they love, or to read what they write. They think they're so clever. In many ways, they think that they are smarter than the filmmakers, let alone smarter than the other audience members. And they really think highly of themselves. They really think highly of themselves. They are not smarter than Brian De Palma, but so many critics act like they're smarter than Brian De Palma. And this is something that I've just learned over so many years. This is who they are. And it's kind of like the Oscars are a joke to me. Well, film critics are a joke as well. It used to be a respectable profession, I guess. Roger Ebert was certainly fun to read, but Roger Ebert oftentimes got things wrong. Oftentimes got a lot of things wrong. And sometimes he would even correct himself years later and say, you know what, that was a better film than I thought. At least that's honest. I think, I'm not saying film criticism should die, but I do think it would be better if film critics were honest with themselves and would at least qualify everything they're saying by saying, hey, this is my opinion. I don't like this film because it's not my cup of tea. For me, the plot didn't work. Or for me, I didn't buy that person's performance. And just, when you review films, understand that because you like a film, it doesn't mean the audience will, and because you don't like a film, it doesn't mean the audience won't like it either.